What if you said life is long? What if you didn't scurry around and make stupid decisions and you actually were thoughtful and invested time and energy because longevity matters, intention matters.
So I was thinking, I think you were the first podcast that I ever did.
I know that.
Yeah.
And you came to Seattle.
At your studio.
Yes, and we talked about
Trust Me
On Line. That's right.
You were a little early to the having a podcast studio thing.
Like 5 years early.
Like 15 years early.
That's my problem. That's my problem. Same with online learning, same with podcasts, same with, photography. I was taking pictures with this thing when it was a 0.3 megapixel camera, and it has served me well. And sometimes it hasn't. Like the whole, I did it for iPhone app. That was a social network.
Yeah.
Photography. So I was not the one who made the $1 billion. I was the one whose ass they kicked. I memean, literally lift and stamp copy of the app that we created. So yeah, I've been early in a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but I was trying to think. So that would have been 2012. So because there was a New York Times piece a couple months ago about how there's like an arms race in podcast studios because like everything's video, and I was just thinking, I think the best podcast studio I've ever been in was in 2012. Yours was in this like whole garage, and that you had a studio audience. Yep. It was insane.
It was real, and we had cameras on cranes.
Yeah,
2 different cranes flying around, and 5 cameras live switched. We would get about between 30 and 50,000 people watching live.
Because there was just no other things you could do. That's
right. Or it was because it was really good, Ryan.
Sure.
And
who is this person?
Really good guests. We did all that stuff super early, and I'm proud of that work. It was fun. And also, it's like I've been doing it now since 2009.
Wow.
So it's one of the longest running interview shows, still up. And we used to do one a month. It was really big. Fly the guest in, do big dinner the night before, and in studio audience of 100 people and all that stuff. And now it's a little more of a volume game, and yet I miss the all of the in-person stuff. I really miss the live broadcast part of it.
Well, it totally spoiled
meat to it.
It totally spoiled me. That was my first one. You're like, we'll fly you out. Is this whole thing? And then like the next one, and then probably the next like 200 I did were all over Skype. There wasn't even like software. Like now that for people who don't know, you're listening to a podcast, there's all this great software that records everything natively, and there's all these tools, and that was not how it was from like 2012 till basically the pandemic. Like the pandemic forced people to invent a bunch of software that would make it somewhat reliable and reasonable, and the quality would be good. But I remember doing yours and going like, I could get used to this because it was nicer than like TV shows that I've done. Sure. And then nothing was like that.
It's like Saturday Night Live quality. Like you show up, you got your own green room, your own bathroom.
Yeah.
The live in studio audience part, we feed you, and the reality is that actually makes for more interesting shows. The real in studio audience to be able to ask questions and sign autographs and take pictures. It does feel a little bit more holistic. And it was also crazy expensive.
I can imagine. And there weren't even the economics to support a podcast at that point, really, right?
There were, but I basically pioneered all of that. So I would go to brands that supported me as a photographer. I go to Nikon or HP, Polaroid underwrote the show, and they would essentially sponsor a whole season. So they would write me a significant check. Yeah. And, the reality is those things were very expensive. Again, 10 people working on it probably for, a couple of weeks in order to produce that. And we had built a lot of the infrastructure. We piggybacked on the back of basically a live streaming software that was originally designed to have overseas soldiers be able to communicate with home. It was called Ustream, and then we hacked Ustream in order to provide a live streaming platform because there's no other versions of that. So we built that as well.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And that's why these dark circles are under my eyes, brother.
Well, I was going to ask you, who do you think has aged more in the like? If we pulled up, we should do this on the video. We should show side by side of the 2012 thing in your studio. I look like a child, and
yes, you. So you definitely aged better. Because you started younger.
It's an unfair aging period. Like 25 to 35 is
a lot better.
You don't change that.
Yeah, that's true. And we won't even say my numbers. But the reality
Not
is...
that I'm 35 either. But
and yet, like, I still have Polaroids from... Like, actually, I used to shoot Polaroid pictures of my guests. I have signed Polaroids of these insane guests like yourself and, hundreds of our mutual friends over the years, and the archive of the show it's actually really fascinating. It's an interesting time capsule.
It's crazy, like when you do like local news stuff now, or I did like some morning shows for the Right Thing Right Now. They don't even have cameramans anymore. They're like these robots, and you're just feeling the crew get smaller and small. Like if you were like a union cameraman or a gaffer, or whatever, you're just like, and then there were two, and then there were one. It's just you're just watching it get lower and lower and lower. It's kind of
And this here we are. First of all, congratulations. This place is insane. It's amazing, and having created a lot of studios myself and been to a lot of them, like this is absolutely world class. It feels really, contrast this to morning television now, where it's like everything's cold and hard and the floors are run by
feels like an Airbnb living room that you're sitting in.
Yeah. And then you go on set and it's just like this big hollow cavernous thing with a couple people sitting in a sound booth. And this is just warm and cozy and comfortable. And it's really nice to see Sam. I haven't seen her in a while.
Yeah, this has been cool. It sort of started. You start think. I think that's the interesting thing about playing it safe is like we often, which is your book.
Yes.
We think that it's often these like big jumps or risks that you take, but more often it's like you take a thing and then that necessitates another thing and then that necessitates another thing. And so it's like we were decided to do this bookstore and then we were like, we're going to film in the bookstore. And then the bookstore started doing well, and we were like, we can't film in the bookstore anymore because people are like knocking on the glass.
We're not selling stuff, right?
Yeah, what happened was I was like, okay, look, it's going to cost like $200 in book sales to just record for 2 hours. But what happened is somebody sent me an email. They're like, I was flying in, I had a layover in Austin, I drove and you were closed. I was like, oh, you can't have a destination that then sporadically closes. So we didn't get to shoot in there. And then this building went for sale during the pandemic, and someone else was going to buy it. And I was like, I just don't want a neighbor. Like, it was like, I wasn't even thinking of this. I was really thinking like, what is the word? Like, I was like, I write in there, what if like a music venue takes this? I was just purely, I was just thinking like hassle.
You're playing defense.
Yeah. But like, you make these decisions and then it's not as, it's rare that you're jumping off this cliff. It never actually feels like this. It's like a series of smaller things.
Well, this is, I think, the punchline of the book is this is not about some massive betrayal.
Yeah.
And I'm very clear in the book. I hate any book that starts off, do perfect thing 1, perfect thing 2, perfect thing 3, and end up with this ideal outcome.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of books do that, and that's why I'm always looking for a great, especially about entrepreneur stuff. Like, it's really knowing how hard it is to build anything, and then what we see this like polished version of something, it's not real. So this book is about the tiny betrayals that we all go through of ourselves, and it's not about necessarily avoiding mistakes. It's about recovering like 1% more quickly, 1% more kindly, faster than before, toward a better realization of who you are and what you really want, and that the best stuff in life is on the other side of risk and not playing it safe.
But yeah, we think of entrepreneurs as these like lovers of risk, but like I forget who said it, but basically entrepreneurs are mitigators of risk. You're taking sort of one risk and then you're finding ways to, like, the whole point of investors is by definition a mitigation of risk. Like if you knew it was going to work, you wouldn't take other people's money.
Mark Andreessen or Ben Horowitz. First of all, Ben Horowitz, great book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. One of the best entrepreneur books of all time. First chapter is like how to fire your friends. Second one is how to tell your investors you lost all their money.
Yeah.
Like that's a more realistic book. But I think it was one of those two guys that basically talks about risk and entrepreneurship like an onion. And the goal is to take, one at a time, a layer of risk away from the business. That's one of the reasons you take money, for example, as you just indicated, is that you take away the risk of being able to hire your first 4 or 5 high quality employees, as an example.
Yeah.
And the next one is, we build out an infrastructure so we don't have to rely on someone else's infrastructure. If Facebook decides to change its thing, then you have your own. So, I think that
you're also eliminating unnecessary risk.
For sure.
That like, this is what like a minimum viable product is. If you're like, I have this brilliant idea, it's obviously going to work. I'm going to spend months and years developing it, and then we're going to do this big blowout launch. If you're wrong, you've just taken this huge, you bet it all on one thing, as opposed to a series of smaller, more iterative bets where you're learning and the costs of being wrong are much lower. This is like the problem with books
Yeah.
is like, how long did you work on this? Like 3-4 years?
Yeah,
And,
2.5 years.
yeah. And your publisher took it because you did a 2-book deal, right?
Yep,
So your publisher took a big swing on you.
Yeah.
And it either works or it doesn't work, right? And then they move on very quickly if it doesn't work, as opposed to like easing yourself into the water. Seeing it life is better and safer when you're not sort of all taking all or nothing bets.
It's fiction.
Yeah.
I mean, Richard Branson invested in my last company, Creative Live, which
Yes.
has since been acquired by a big public company. We can cover
Yeah.
that journey. But so Richard ended up being a mentor and a friend. And what people think is that he just takes all these big swings.
Yeah.
He, over lunch, he's always saying, "Man, you got to protect the downside." Like
Yeah.
that's his mantra. And even starting Virgin Airlines,
Yeah.
the first plane he bought publicly, it looks like a huge swing. He bought a 747.
Yeah.
Like who does that?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, most people buy a Cessna and then
Yeah.
and then a little jet and they and
Yeah, as you're building up the thing.
right. So everyone's like, well, look at Richard. He bought a 747. And I'm sitting with him at lunch and he's saying, actually when I bought that from them, I pre-negotiated the price that I would sell it back to them when it didn't work.
Right.
Not if it didn't work.
Sure,
He was
sure.
pretty sure it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And he
So he's really just leasing a plane. He's like borrowing it.
Right.
And if it works, there's a lot of upside. If it doesn't work, the downside is not lose all your money.
For sure. And in the beginning of Never Play It Safe, I say, look, we're not talking about seatbelts and sunscreen. This is not about
Sure.
not protecting the
Yes.
downside or not about emotional or physical safety. All those things are really important.
Yeah.
And to your point, like most people, the story that's about Richard, for example, is that, oh my God, he just takes these big swings.
Yeah, it's like pushing all the chips in. You never go all in. Yeah.
Never. And yet, I think it serves so many people
Yeah.
poorly to think that that's how it's done. And as you said, and I talk about a lot in the book, it's just about getting out of your comfort zone on a regular basis, getting comfortable. Being uncomfortable is actually the path to the best stuff in life.
Well, on the one hand, it makes it all seem glamorous and cooler than it actually is. So the entrepreneur gets to present themselves as this like swashbuckler, renegade, as opposed to this like spreadsheet junkie sort of like hedger. And then I think the other way it serves us is by making it seem like you have to have enough money to buy a plane outright to start a company. Then you're able to not do it, like let yourself off the hook and say that's impossible.
Right.
Or you're able to go, oh, I need to get all these things right first.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do it in 10 years as opposed to taking some tangible. So you say, oh, I need to buy to use your metaphor, I need to buy a jet. So I need to raise $100 million as opposed to I need $100,000 to buy a Cessna that I'm going to do these small little ferrying flights for, and then whatever. So you're able to go, this is a 10 years from now goal instead of what am I going to do today?
For sure. And the second chapter in the book is about time. And I think the time horizons have completely destroyed a lot of what how we think, specifically on two vectors. One, when you're working on something that you love, time is actually on your side.
Yeah.
Just think about this project here. As you said, one thing is unfolded into another. You originally, well, I'm a writer, and then I'm like, it's crazy to buy a bookstore, and then you bought the studio next to it, and then that's how time expands. And if you look back, I mean, I look back, and your kids are grown up, and you got buildings, and you got and I don't. It doesn't seem like all that long passed between the last time I was here, and then by extension, the alternate version of time is we are taught to believe that there's never enough time.
Yeah.
And what that creates is so much like just bad behavior.
Yeah.
You do stupid shit because you think, I mean, and now I'm all for urgency, right?
Yeah.
Maybe long-term patience, short-term urgency. Like you need to get up and, knock out your list of to-dos. But what if we thought about life being long?
Yeah.
What if we could think on 10-year horizons? I have never been disappointed when I've been able to think, when I could afford to think on a long, I mean, hey, rent's due, I get it.
Yeah.
But if you can afford to think on a long-term basis, if you can believe that life is long, I can't believe I'm on like my third or fourth, I'm like the cockroach, I'm like my third or fourth, life career. And I feel like we get that so wrong.
Yeah. There's a thing called Hofstadter's law, and it's basically, things always take longer than you expect, even when you take this law into account. So like I remember with Trust Me I'm Lying, where I was like, if this book doesn't come out like right now, it's gonna be like irrelevant. I was like, this is like of the moment. I should have, in retrospect, the idea that you're doing anything that you feel like you need to rush to get out creatively is a bad sign.
Yeah.
Like it means that it's not timeless enough.
Yeah.
And it's probably not worth doing unless it's like a tweet or something, right? But I remember thinking like, this is very much of this moment. It has to come out. And like, ironically, and also terrifyingly, all the ideas in the book are probably more relevant 12 years after it came out than before. And I remember its like second best week was like the week after Trump got elected. So it had been out for like 5 years or something. And you think like, hey, I need this now, and if it doesn't happen now, it's never going to happen.
For sure.
But when you give stuff more time and more runway, you just increase your chances of working. And then also just the idea of compound interest, like that applies to attention, giving stuff time to find its audience and develop. I think too many people quit on stuff too early. There's definitely stuff that people should have quit on a long time ago, like things that are not going anywhere. But I think what a lot of people do with books or podcasts or any kind of project is they do like one or two and then it doesn't work. And then they go, oh, the idea was bad. And really, audience acquisition is just a long, arduous process. Sometimes the algorithm blesses you and it just happens.
Sure.
But those people are the exceptions to the rule rather than the rule. And the idea that, I'm just doing a 10-year anniversary edition of The Obstacles Away. It comes out next month. It's selling more almost every year than it did when it came out. Yeah. But if you had asked me how I thought it did the first week or the first month or the first 6 months, I would have not seen it as a huge success. In retrospect, I don't like the idea. Its first week of sales is irrelevant because now it has hundreds of weeks of sales into existence. And each one of those initial, the unit of measurement becomes larger and larger.
I think we get time really wrong in our culture. And we do so much stuff when we're scurrying around. Just think of the 21-year-olds that think they got to figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, no disrespect.
Like I'm late.
Totally. I'm late to the game. Out with my friends are, so that's one of the things. And there's also this other fascinating thing that happens with time is, let's just go back to when we lived in villages.
Yeah.
We would see, let's just say Gary learn to ride a bike.
Yeah.
We see, Gary is our peer. Gary learns to ride a bike. Oh, he's slightly better.
What are these villages? Are these like thousands of years old villages? I'm confused now on the bike.
10,000.
Okay. So like, what?
Good point.
I was like, is this the 50s?
Anything. Hunting. Gary's a good hunter. We're going to go 10,000 years back. Gary's a good hunter.
Yeah.
And
where'd he get his bike?
I don't know. I'm thinking Gary the hunter. It's killing me. But, Gary's gifted athlete.
Yeah.
And then he becomes a hunter. And he's a really good hunter. But Gary missed a few that he should have. And you basically saw Gary progress in real time. You realized that this took application of effort.
Yeah, sure.
Time happened. Yeah. There were many failures along the way. Yeah. There were times where he came back and was dejected because he didn't get the kill that he was supposed to get. And yet, fast forward to today, it's literally that made sense to our brains.
Yeah, sure.
Right now, fast forward.
You just hear about Chappelle Roan, and you're like, she's the biggest performer in the world. Came out of nowhere,
literally. But
that's not how it happened at all.
At all. But we are presented with nothing and then superstar. Yeah. And the way that it shows up is it just in your feed with this person, at Wembley Stadium.
Yeah.
And I've never even heard of this person. How is this possible?
Yeah.
And that really screws us up.
It's depressing and demoralizing and disorienting. Yeah.
Disorienting, I think, is a really good word. So that's one of the reasons. Time is a weird thing to write about.
Yeah.
And yet it is actually this beautiful thing. It can be a wind at your back as opposed to time as this, this conveyor belt that's running in the background and we're always losing it. Yes, it's true. You can say life is short.
Yeah.
Because that may motivate you. But what if you said life is long? What if you didn't scurry around and make stupid decisions and you actually were thoughtful and invested time and energy? Because longevity matters, intention matters.
Yeah.
To me, that's just such a better foundation for not just building a business or a career like we're talking about, but a life.
Seneca's thing is that life isn't short, it's that we make it short because we waste so much of it, right? So yeah, if you dick around for a huge chunk of your life and then you've belatedly stumble upon this thing, you're going to go, oh, I wish I got to this earlier. That's different than like, hey, I just started playing guitar. Why am I not as good as, the best people in the world?
This YouTube hero who
Yeah.
started from his garage, and it just turns out he's made 1,000 YouTube videos
Yeah.
about how to do it, and
Yeah, I think about that too. I've been trying to give myself a little grace on projects where it's like, this is a thing, hopefully that will last for years. And also, I'm going to be working on it for a year or years. So the idea of kicking myself because I was 5 minutes late today is silly, right? Or even just measuring how successful I was today, if this isn't a thing whose value you're going to measure in days, right?
Yep.
And so, like, obviously every instant matters, and not wasting time is important, but you can kind of get in this thing where you're micromanaging in increments that are not reflective of the whole. Like,
Yeah.
when you listen to a really great album, you're not like, I'm so glad they rushed this. Like, you're not like, if this had come out 5 minutes sooner, or if they'd finished a month earlier, it would be better. You're like, it takes what it takes, right? And just kind of getting to a place where you accept, like, the process is the process, that this isn't a thing measured in individual encounters, but it's a collective, cumulative effort over a long period of time. You can kind of slow it down and really actually treat it with the seriousness that it deserves. Because you think you're being like disciplined by holding yourself accountable and going like, I can't let my attention drift or whatever. But what you're actually doing is selling the project short, because you're acting as if like 30 seconds here or there is going to be reflected in this immensely complicated, enormous thing.
Yes. I think there's someone who's listening right now, or two ideas. One is like, well, how do you know when, and that's another big topic I take on in the book, is your intuition. You actually hone this. This is a thing that will mature if I let it. And you start to be able to pay attention and listen to the things that are inside you, that not just the rational mind that is telling you all the things that we just trotted through of how, hard and difficult and wrong this is. It's going to be late, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And I also thought we might actually spar on this time thing, because I have one of my
Memento Mori
gifts is I have a gift from you that's a Memento Mori coin, which means you're going to die, right?
Yeah.
And that is a sort of a life is short message. And yet I watch you be so deliberate, so patient. I remember last time we were sitting on back porch, you're talking to me about the vision that you had for the building. And now I come here and it's fully realized.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like you rushed. Everything is like in its place. It's beautiful and perfect. And so, what's the Stoic? Are we going to fight on this?
No. I think that was like an important lesson, because so I am much more of a like, okay, these are the 10 things we have to do. Let's just knock them out and do them. And Samantha, my wife, is much more like, I'm not really feeling it right now. Like, I'm going to think more about it.
Clear. Samantha was giving me a tour.
Yeah.
And Ryan's like, we got to get in here to record.
Yeah. I'm much more like, let's just get it done and move it forward. And she's not.
Yeah.
And like, I think working on this bookstore together was helpful, because when I look at each of the individual things, I'm upstairs and I look out over the balcony, I'm not like, see, we could have finished that one thing on Tuesday, and instead it was done the following Thursday. That like 10 days was an inefficiency. It's just, it recedes into the distance. In the moment it matters, but it recedes in the distance. And the Memento Mori thing is, it's easy to get wrong, right?
Yeah.
Because look, a lot of people act like they have forever. They are oblivious to the fact that you could go at any moment, and that they're really inefficient and wasteful with their time. And I think there's a message where Memento Mori is really important. But the other side of Memento Mori, like the part where Marcus Aurelius talks about it specifically in Meditations, which I've always been struck by, and it struck me before I had kids and a lot more after, he says that, try to do this as you're tucking your kids in at night. Mm-hmm. He's saying, like, say to yourself, like, you could die, they could die, neither of you might make it till the morning. Now, he's not saying both of you could die, so make sure you wrap this up quickly. He's saying the exact opposite, right? He's saying, why are you rushing through this? Yeah. And so that's
savor.
It's like, if you think about what you're actually rushing towards, you think you're rushing towards the finishing of this project, shipping this thing, going on this trip, getting them to bed. But the other way to think about it, what a Stoic might say, is what you're rushing towards is death. Like we're only going one direction in one place. So like, why are you trying to get it over quickly? And there's this instinct you have as a parent where like, and people will sit to be like, they'll be walking soon. And you go, I know, I can't wait. And then you're like, I can't wait till they start school. I can't wait until they're a little more independent. You're thinking about like all these next steps.
Yep.
And then
Suddenly you're like, wait a minute.
where did it go?
Where's it
You know, and again, it's only going in one direction for both of you.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you're like, I would trade anything for one more minute of each of those phases.
Yep.
And you rushed through them. And so I think what Memento Mori can help you speed up
Yep.
because you don't have forever. And why are you showing up every day at this job you hate, you know, telling yourself, I just got to wait till I can retire. I just got to wait till things go back to normal. You don't know that you have that.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is, you know, why are you rushing around everywhere, going a million miles a minute, when in reality, this present moment is all that you have and you're rejecting it?
This is exactly why I chose to write about the things I chose to write about in this book. There are so many things in our culture that have these, we think it's one way and it's really the other.
Yeah.
And when I look at my own life and the mistakes that I made and the recoveries, and I look at my friends who are the best in the world with so many things, I mean, very, very inspiring, like this just keeps showing itself to be true. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, I write about those are the 7 tools in the book. Each one of these things is true. Time, you just laid out, you know, I thought we would get here, to be fair. I didn't think we were going to spar. I knew what, you know, what Marx Aurelius meant. And that it's like, people, how can we both like need to, you know, seize the day and be patient? And
Do you know what negative capability is?
no.
So Keats, the poet, he said that, like, basically that what an artist has to be able to do is sort of hold confusing, contradictory ideas in their head at the same time. Fitzgerald's version of it was that, you know, the sign of a first-rate intelligence is to be able to hold 2 contradictory ideas.
Familiar with Fitzgerald's.
But I think Keats's concept is a little more interesting because it's sort of more vague. But just the idea that it's like sometimes it's this way and sometimes it's this way and sometimes it's a combination of all the way. Just basically to like the simplicity of it's complicated, and for your mind to be able to hold that ambiguity and that complication and to sit with it and to find like the advice in each particular situation, that is a skill. So many people want to like reduce it down to these maxims or these rules, always do it this way. But the idea that memento mori could provide 2 equally true opposite lessons is kind of the beauty of philosophy and life. It's fucking complicated.
Totally. And that's like literally why I was inspired to write the book, because there are so many of these things in our culture. I highlighted what I think are the 7 most important ones where you think it's one way, it's the other. Time, we just sort of talked about. I think attention is another really, really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
We are taught, especially in this culture right now, that getting attention is everything. That's how your podcast stands out. And that's, you know, that's, I need to get attention. You know, we've got our mutual friend Gary is like, I day trade attention. And, you know, attention is this buzzword. And also, like, as when a baby comes out, if a baby does not actually get held, it dies. It's not just like it doesn't do well. It can die from not human contact. So a baby's job to coo and be cute is to get attention. So, and yet, attention is the most valuable thing. It really defines our entire experience. And
it's also toxic.
Totally. If I told you, but that it's actually about paying it, it's about directing it, not about getting it. The irony is that if you are a person who can direct your attention, if you are of the best in the world of this quality, attention will come your way as a downstream effect of you being insanely good at choosing what you pay attention to. So
a lot of these things are indirect results of doing the right thing.
I think that's, and to me, there were so many of those that were counterintuitive, and the aggregate of those, I felt like when I look around, just leads to a bunch of bad behavior and chaotic outcomes, and just not a life well lived, not a rich, meaningful, creative life. And again, that's how I got to those topics in the book. And this reminds me of a little story. Speaking about time and attention, I was, prior to this book being printed, I worked for 2.5 years on the wrong book, essentially.
Oh,
I don't know if you know this.
No.
I wrote
between the creative calling and this one.
Yes, I tinkered a lot, And then I started writing. I'd say research for about a year, and then I started writing. And let's just say I'm writing every day for 13 months.
Yeah.
Okay, 13 months.
Yeah.
8 weeks before my deadline, I throw it all in the trash. And we have the same agent.
Yeah.
I call
Steve's-
Steve. And you can imagine, right? You can imagine. He's
Yeah.
a legend. He's just such a great, smart, kind, awesome guy. And you can imagine what he said. And I was like, Steve, this is not the book.
Yeah.
And he, and in his own way, he's like, okay, talk to me.
Yeah.
He's just like, closing his eyes and scratching his forehead. And essentially I said, I think this is going to be a good book as it is,
Yeah.
but it's not the right book.
Yeah.
It's not the book that I want to do. And I need you to back me here. And this is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And it is actually that process that led to the title of the book, because I was reflective of like, wait a minute, this is actually all of the best things in my life. When I look back at the best decisions, whether those are, relationships, businesses, friends, communities that I wanted to build, or things that I wanted to leave, things that were toxic, it always felt like a massive risk. And I knew so clearly by listening to developing a muscle that I'm pretty good at as an artist, to develop the muscle of intuition, to be able to go away and write the book as it was meant to be written. And I threw away 55,000 of 62,000 words.
But it's all prologue, I imagine, for this.
And when I showed up, both Steve and my publisher were like, "Oh my God, that's amazing! Like,
Yeah.
thank you so much for doing it. This is the book that you needed to do." And that, to me, that is one of those bigger risks.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there was downside protection there, right? I do believe that there are safety valves, and yet no one in the room when we were talking about it really wanted to lean into that.
Of course.
And
Because it's a pain in the ass.
totally,
Yeah.
it's a pain in the ass to be right.
And they don't have the benefit of believing in and being artistically inspired by the thing, because that's your job.
Right.
So they're only going to be looking at it from a paperwork standpoint and a moving thing
Deadlines
standpoint and unpleasant conversation standpoints, and then gaps in the schedule standpoint. All they're getting only the downside, potentially for the upside of it working. And by the way, they've been in this position a million times. And what you're saying is also what people who weren't working the entire time are also saying. You know what I mean? And so it can be tough to judge.
Yeah. And yet I stand by that as that, to me, that's the defining moment of the book. And for so many people in so many ways, as you talked about, there, like that, if you look back, it is a bunch of deciding that the best stuff is on the other side of your comfort zone, and what you're going to do to be willing to put yourself there intentionally, willingly. Sometimes you find yourself there accidentally or, through no fault of your own. And yet, if you can start to condition yourself that that's actually a good thing, it's not dissimilar to building a muscle.
Yeah. I was thinking of another contradictory one that I think we've talked about before, which is like tools are important, right? Having the right tools, knowing how to use the tools. I'm talking about technology here, environments, systems, whatever. And then also I find that, who cares a lot about tools is like people who suck, like there's like the obsession with
what camera should I get?
Yeah, what's the best gear? What do the greats do? I've memorized all the artistic routines of all these people. And then I'm like, but what have you ever done? And so it's this interesting thing where, you want to come up with and optimize a system. And at the same time, like if you've really got the stuff, you could do it in crayon and it would still be good.
Yep. To me, that's beautiful. And again, the ability to understand that and to know when you are fooling yourself.
Yeah.
And when that's real.
Yeah.
That's, developing that sense of intuition inside of you, which is I think the most important thing that we know the least about.
Yeah.
And if you walk into any sort of science environment, you talk about intuition, the people who are really studying intuition as a science understand that actually rational thought is pretty slow, pretty clumsy. Intuition is super fast. It's a cellular level. Your cells have memories, and all of that comes to bear when you're thinking. That's why they call it a gut feeling. It's a body feeling. Aside from the people who study intuition and knowledge and whatnot, everyone else is like, oh God, how do I know when to trust me? Data. And data is valuable. And I think of the times where I didn't trust my intuition.
Yeah.
And I always regret those times.
Yeah. Or are those just the ones that stand out? You don't remember all the times that you didn't trust your intuition and it worked out. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like in retrospect, like it's an interesting thing, right? Because you're like, I didn't want to do this version of the book, so I tore it all down and went on this other one. But I know objectively there are times where I had something. Like I remember with the Daily Stoic, I remember I sent a copy of it to my editor. I'd been working on it. First off, Steve was like, "This will be your best-selling book," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, just from the idea, I was like, "This sounds like something an agent would say. That can't possibly be true. Who reads these page-a-day things?" Like, it was inconceivable to me because I wasn't like familiar with the genre. But then I did it, and because I wasn't as confident with the genre and the approach. I was like, I remember sending it to my editor and then going like, I remember thinking I wanted them to tell me it wasn't good enough and that I needed to go spend a lot more time on it. Like I felt like I was kind of rushing it, and I felt like it I just remember feeling like it wasn't what it was supposed to be and wanting them to like confirm that.
Sure.
And they didn't. They were like, "No, it's actually really good. Here are these things you need to tweak."
Right.
And then it came out and it did like really well, obviously. But that that thing of like I didn't think it was going to be good and it worked. We forget that feeling a lot, right? Because that's like when you didn't trust yourself. Like I had a gut feeling and I didn't listen to the gut feeling and it worked out.
Well, let me try and do it. Mind ninja thing.
Okay.
You could have stopped the presses,
Yeah, sure.
but you put it in front of them, and they said it was great, and then you said, "Okay, maybe there is something here. I am going to trust
Yeah.
this process where I am in the. It's really about trusting the process, right?
Yeah.
And so, to me, the just bringing awareness of it. Look, we've talked about like three big topics: attention, time, and intuition. And the murky nature of these things is exactly why I wanted to tackle that stuff in this book. And head nod to Robert Greene,
Yeah.
who helped me think about these things, right? He's a very, very powerful thinker. And to me, like these, when I look at the array of tools that we have in our toolbox, and if I can call those each, that's how I refer to them in the chapters of the book. Like, these are ones that I have had more conversations, more heartfelt, earnest, in-depth, late-night conversations with my friends like you that I just don't really see out there in popular culture. I certainly don't see them assembled into one place as a suite of tools that, man, if you really learned how to get good with this stuff, then boy, this is a recipe or a blueprint for a life well lived on the other side of your comfort zone.
There's just something humbling. I think you experience it in social media where you're putting so much more stuff out. Like you'll do a couple books in your lifetime. You'll do a couple movies in your most big creative projects are so expensive. They take so long. You're not going to get 1,000 reps of them.
Totally.
But on social media, you're doing it's so much smaller and cheaper, and it's all about how it spreads that you get more shots at it. And there is this kind of weird experience where you're like, that wasn't very good. I'll have them take it down. And then by the time you get them to take it down, it's like, it's crushed.
Right.
You're just like, so you're like, wait, why? Like there's this kind of constant feeling of being perplexed about what does well and what doesn't do well.
Sure.
And you sort of go, I think it was William Goldman, the screenwriter, said like, nobody knows anything about what's going to work. There is just a randomness to it too. And so you have to have that intuition, and then also this kind of humility of like, if you think you probably don't know.
For sure. And I think that's what makes you think hard about things. Which is where that's where good stuff comes out of that. I mean, essentially all the Hollywood is a hits driven machine.
Yeah.
And you'd think that if the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars that are spent on movies cannot figure out what a hit is in advance of putting it out, then nobody can, because they're literally spending hundreds of billions of dollars studying it, creating all sorts of genres and every possible incarnation of it, and yet we still don't know what's going to be a hit.
Right.
And that should tell you the beautiful thing about art.
Yeah.
That it really is mysterious, and the act of doing it and learning and testing is the only way we get results.
Yeah, and you're going to be surprised, and some things are going to pop right away, and some things are going to take a long time. That's the other part. It's like you're comparing something that popped immediately with something that's going to find its audience 10 years from now.
Yeah.
But you don't know that in 10 years from now they're going to be compared to each other very differently.
Right. And that's what the last two chapters of the book, one is about failure and the other is about practice. That's essentially what we're talking about, right? We're talking about this is the way that you learn these things. You just talked about what social media allows you to do is put so much stuff out there and fail and learn quickly. And then practice is like, this is actually what you do.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about what you think. It's about what you do. Are you hitting publish? Are you, sending this newsletter out? Are you listening to the response that the market's giving you to your business or to your creative project or whatever? And, we are both, I think, we believe deeply in good habits and healthy habits. And there's actually a hygiene around how to think and approach all these decisions that we have in life creatively. Like this is actually a book about creativity.
Yeah.
And it's easy to see this hygiene manifest itself in, go to bed, without having had 10 drinks and get up at a decent hour and move your body. And what I advocate for is that there's actually a hygiene to all this stuff that we've been talking about. There's a methodology and it's not rocket science and it's available to anybody.
Do you wish sometimes that maybe you'd stayed just being an individual creator and not started a company? I always wondered about this.
Well, I do. And it's not an accident that right now, so for everyone who's not familiar with my past, I've basically been a lifelong artist. I operated pretty successfully in a lot of different, in television, in books, in photography, one of the top commercial photographers in the world. And sort of accidentally, go back to our live streaming the podcast. I also started live streaming some of my photo shoots. They're like, oh my God, 25,000 people are watching me like shoot this album cover for this band. How random. I bet there's something here. Maybe we could teach some stuff on the internet. And right now this sounds laughable because this was 100 years ago. But, in 2009, it was very innovative. Short story too long already. I started a company that had that as its core ethos.
Creative Live.
It was called Creative Live. You've taught on that platform, Tim Ferriss, Brene Brown. So many people have appeared there as either guest or as have taught full scale, classes. It was basically a precursor to master class that had tens of millions of users, did hundreds of millions in revenue, and it got really big. Yeah, and it got really, like all things do, it got really confusing. And at some point, I had to segue out of my, hey, I'm an artist and I founded this thing, and I turned it over to the venture capitalists, and basically it wasn't going well, so I had to come back.
Yeah. You had to be a full-time chief executive instead of being a creative person.
From a venture-backed, a venture-backed CEO where hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. Not the thing I sign up, wake up and say, I can't wait to do this. Yeah. But also, for any number of reasons I don't have to go into, it was the right thing to do at the right time. Yeah. Right thing right now. And yet, on the other side of that, it was some of the most, potent and valuable learnings that I've had in my entire life. I was connected to so many new people in ways I never could have imagined, and had insane mentors and learned a lot. And I simultaneously am not going to do that ever. Like, just so we're crystal clear. The things that I'm working on, books, I got a television show development. That's not to say I'm not involved with companies, because I'm a co-founder in a handful of other companies right now that I'm really excited about. Some at the intersection of AI and creativity, and it doesn't matter. But one thing's very clear in response to your question is I'm not going to operate any other businesses besides my own personal business. Yeah. And that is because this is sort of an awareness. Know thyself. Let's go back a couple thousand years to that principle, right? Know thyself. That's not where, my heart sings, and it's not a set of skills. Can I develop those skills? Yeah, I did. Yeah. I had to. I navigated from founding idea to public company acquisition. And yet it doesn't make me want to do it anymore. So I'm going back to, basically trying to be a polymath artist where I want to touch a lot of things that interest me and be very, very passionate about the thing that grabs my attention, go all in on that, and contribute to a lot of different projects. Yeah. But just be at my core an independent artist.
Well, because I was listening to this podcast the other day, and this guy, he'd started a blog, and then he'd started doing some products, and then he built like a YouTube following. And I was like, oh, I've done this. And then he'd raised like a bunch of money. And then now it was like very big, like 100 employees big. Sure. And I there was part of me that was like, oh, this is the playbook, And then I was like, wait a minute. I don't think Chase had that much money. And that's literally what I was thinking of.
if this thought enters your mind,
Yeah.
call me.
Yeah, no, that's why I was like, oh, I'm so glad Chase is coming, because I was like, Chase didn't have that much fun, and I remember you telling me something too. There's something that I think people get attracted to the idea of scale, and they get attracted to these big numbers. And I remember you telling me that early on, someone had tried to acquire Creative Life for a life-changing amount of money.
sure, yeah.
But because that was a life-changing amount of money to you as a person and you as an artist.
Yeah.
But to the VC companies that had given you money, that was not a life-changing amount of money. That was a failure. And so you, to me, part of being a creative, or what a lot of what attracts someone to be a creative, is not only not having to be the boss, but not having a boss.
Yes.
And you think that scale is empowering you, and actually it's disempowering you, because somebody else is ultimately the decision maker of whether you accept this deal or that deal, grow this rate or this rate, and now you have somebody else calling the shots.
Yeah. And that is it's a very interesting thing that happens in your mind.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, it's, wow, it's working. This is so great. Who would, especially if it has a virtuous sort of underpinning. I mean, we were educating tens of millions of people on the internet for free, teaching real skills that were transforming lives all over the world. We had thousands of transformation stories that were coming in from every corner of the globe. I mean, classes that were being watched by 150,000 people in real time.
Yeah.
So there's this narrative that is easy to cook up for oneself, which is like, good for everybody. Let's just, keep doing it. And yet, and I do still feel like the path that we took was the right path.
Sure.
Looking backwards, I can connect the dots. And yet, to a friend of mine who might be asking, should I do this?
Yeah.
I would just list the things. Are you sure? Because here's what you get with that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of basically a very, very high personal cost that you will pay for that.
Yeah, it's like, I think what I took from your experience, and you can take from the experiences of some other people, is that sometimes staying small or boutique or bespoke, not going as big as you can go, is actually the riskier, more courageous thing.
For sure.
And then just kind of defaulting towards growth, defaulting towards the traditional playbook for building a business, is the less risky, brave thing. Like, the bookstore is working and people go, have you thought about opening another one? And I go, absolutely not. Because I have it, and Robert Greene talks about this a lot, about not going past the mark that you aim for, and having some version of success, or having some version of your life that you're optimizing for, and making sure that you're not just always making the decision like, what makes us more money, what gets us bigger, what gets me more famous, what gets me more followers, because you don't actually know if that's what you want.
I'm telling you, man, so I hate to be that dude who's in the interview talking about his book, but there's a whole chapter about that. It's the constraints chapter.
Yeah.
And that constraints actually create and cultivate and can direct creativity. It's a very powerful act.
Sure.
If you ask Edward de Bono, who's got a really famous lateral thinking theory about how to, basically cultivate creative thinking. We don't have to go into it, but the ironic twist is that I tell a story in the constraints chapter, which is the opposite of constraints. Constraints are great, and here's what happens if you don't. And I use my own personal example. And essentially, I was at a hotel room in Las Vegas. It was a brand new hotel. We were in the suite. I'd just gotten out. I'm showering to go catch, probably a private flight. And I just gotten off stage with Lady Gaga. We had announced that she and I were relaunching the Polaroid brand. Ari Emanuel, the agent, who's famously was the
from Entourage.
Yeah, the Entourage. He had literally had 2 cell phones up to his head, and he was Lady Gaga's agent. We're backstage. It's a meet dress period, so she's like literally
the biggest person in the world. Yeah.
The biggest person in the world, and I'd just gotten off stage making this big announcement. Creative Live had just people are trying to buy Creative Live. I've got millions of people barking on. I just got back from an overnight trip to Shanghai. It couldn't have been better.
Yeah.
And I get out of the shower thinking, I'm pretty sweet.
Yeah.
And my wife, and she said, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like,
this sucks.
Yeah. What are you doing? How much is enough?
Yeah.
And it was exactly the same thing, the same response that you would think. I was like so confused because literally this is like the dream on steroids.
Doesn't everyone want this?
This is the dream on steroids. And she made me, like our partners in life often do. She made me just stopped me dead in my tracks. And I said, "What do you mean?" And then I thought about it, and I knew exactly what she meant without having to say anything more. And that is very much about how if that was a betrayal of myself, then this moment here on the backside of having Creative Live acquired, and you're asking me, do you want to do that? Do you want to go blow it out again? And I'm like, I'm actually, no, I have actually learned. I've wisened.
Sometimes you got to go kind of right up, maybe even a little bit over the edge, and then you're like, pull it, you got to figure it out. I've had that with Samantha too. She's pointed out, I think rightly, it's like, look, it's not like it was easy for you to do it. It was hard and it was right sacrifices, but like you're also getting the upsides.
Oh, for sure.
And she's like, like, this isn't the rest of our dream. Like, so like this is your dream. So as hard as it is for you, it's hard for us, but without the benefit of being the person who's doing it, right? And it's sometimes seeing it from another person's perspective, like, your wife's coming on all the travel or whatever, she's like, this is a grind. Actually, these people are awful. Yeah. Actually, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, oh yeah, you see it just slightly from the side, and you go, this isn't healthy. This isn't natural. This isn't good for you. And by the way, I haven't taken pictures in a year, or I have no time to write, or I actually hate the material that I'm doing. And you go, oh, so wait, the reward for me for all my success is that I don't get to be creative anymore, or creative in the way that I like to be creative. What kind of success is that?
Totally. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that I feel like we don't talk a lot about.
Yeah.
And it's real. I mean, we talk about it, and sometimes like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to do this because I'm not sleeping at home in my house with my kids.
Yeah. And how many nights are you away?
Yeah.
Or
and very shortly after this, we were sitting down, intimate dinner, table for two in the corner, having a very heartfelt, earnest conversation about family stuff, and we're having this really intimate conversation, and I get up to leave, and the person who's sitting 2.5 feet away from me, huge fan, lifelong fan, and then you're like, what has happened?
Yeah.
What? And we're talking like a fraction of actual Hollywood celebrity status, and it was.
So you're like, this makes you uncomfortable, and yet what I'm doing is trying to get more of it.
Yes.
That's insane. That's a contradiction that you do have to resolve.
Yes.
You go, this thing that I have isn't making me happy. It's not working, and yet I'm spending all of my waking hours trying to get more of it because everyone else seems to think that it's great.
Yeah.
And the economic logic is very clear that if I keep doing this, I'll get more. You have to go, that is insanity.
Yeah. And this is, again, go back to the book. Like, this is, we have a compass inside us. We have values.
Sure.
And navigating, like, am I doing the right thing? And is this right for me and right now? And those are some of the hardest discussions and decisions that we have on this planet, especially. The world's getting more complex, not less. So we need more tools for this.
Yes.
Right. And that's why I think the book is well done.
No, constraints are super important. One of the Stoics, Cleanthes, was saying that's like the beauty of poetry, he says, is the fetters. He's saying that, like, the rhyming structure, the size, the length, if there is such a thing as free-verse poetry, and some of it's beautiful, but the best poems are not that, right? They're not just blah, because it doesn't mean anything. Because you can do anything and everything, it kind of means nothing. Mm-hmm. It's the rhyming structure or the system, the haiku being like the most constrained of it. It forces creativity by nature of eliminating some of the creative options. And if you think about that with life too, like, here are the things I'm not willing to do. Here's the time I'm allotting to it. Here's how long I'm willing to do something. Here's what's actually important to me. Here's my number that I'm retiring after. Whatever it is, it can create a system where it actually makes you think that it's weighing you down, and it is. It's just like weighing you down in a good way. It's like connecting you to reality instead of drifting off into fantasy land or self-absorption or narcissism or worse.
Yeah. And there's just not a lot of those. I don't think there's a lot of those North Stars for us culturally. To me, that was when I threw it all in the trash. It was really that North Star. Like, no, I need, these are the things that I struggle with.
Yeah.
And if you can't write a book about something you're struggling with, what kind of book are you writing? This is not a book about how to, again, do perfect thing A, B, C, so get great result D. This is like, what are and I know this about, we have a lot of mutual friends who struggle with this stuff, and we've talked a lot about it, over dinners and meals. And to me, this is why it's interesting, is that I know where my challenges are and where my blind spots are. And I look, where have I made the most mistakes? Oh my gosh, what is it? The universe teaches you the same lesson over and over and over until you get it. So I just looked back. It was really easy. I looked back and was like, where have I totally blown it the most? Those are my chapters.
Well, that's a good artistic rule, by the way, a good constraint. It's like, if it feels good to do, in the sense that, like, it's not dangerous, you're not afraid, it's not making you vulnerable in some way, it's probably like claptrap, if it's not, do I really want to put this out there? It's probably somebody else could do it. If the idea of it being scary and weird and uncomfortable and challenging to use a person, that's a sign, not always, because it could be also weird delusions. But it could be that kind of thing, like, hey, you could have kept that to yourself. No one was asking for that. But it should be not safe. There's what, like, if it wasn't, what are you delivering? If you feel comfortable and safe with it.
Let's go back to Daily Stoic.
Okay.
You felt uncomfortable.
It was scary. Sure.
Delivering it. And this is sort of what I mean. Like, we just had this, I think, an interested spirit discussion about it. And yet you decided, because this is what I mean. This is, your intuition actually was working for you. You're like, I don't know. It's like, it's not going to be the thing. And then it's not just you. It's like you got a bunch of people around you. There's other inputs to the system. You're like, okay, I'm vibing. And then, lo and behold, it's this massive success. So, this is why this is the things that are uncomfortable. It's a great place to look for interesting stuff in life. And the people who I feel like that I know are the most connected and heartfelt, earnest people, like, they actually, this is their sort of master muscle. Like, they're good at looking at these places. And, it doesn't mean that we're trying to, only fix the things we suck at. And I don't mean to say that as I look back at my life, but these are, to me, there's a suite of tools that, when together, they can combine in really interesting and useful ways. Just think of the idea of attention. And when you're paying attention to something, time fundamentally changes, right? If you're walking in the woods for 5 days, it can feel like 5 weeks. Time dilation is real. This is how, say, attention, that tool, and the understanding of time can go together.
One of my rules is, like, or one of my sort of observations about life is, if you don't regularly forget what day it is, you're not doing interesting enough work. You should be lost in what you're doing on a regular basis. It doesn't just have to be work. You could just be lost because you're having a great time with your family. You have great hobbies. But if you're not regularly, like, just losing track of time, if you're regularly thinking, how much time do I have left on this? That's probably a sign that you're caught up too much in the day-to-day minutia or the obligations, or just doing what everyone else is doing. Like, the experience for people during the pandemic, where they're like, what day is it? What month is it? That's something that I don't think was new to artists. No. Artists are like, that's awesome. You're experiencing that because your life isn't being dictated by a commute, by your boss, by stupid meetings. You have a certain amount of autonomy in your life for a change, even though actually you've lost a whole bunch of autonomy. You can't leave your house, but the hours in your day were much more yours, and you found that you loved baking, or you loved like binging on these shows that you never heard of. You went down all these rabbit holes. That's why book sales went way up. Is like people were getting lost in things for a change, and like that's obviously that's not sustainable. But you have to have, if you don't have some version of that in your life, it strikes as probably an empty life.
Well, and let's talk about how disorienting that was. And the reason it's disorienting is because it's so unfamiliar to not have all of that, like, basically bullshit construct.
Okay, you knew it's Monday because you hate Mondays.
Because you had a stupid calendar on your desk that you had to, I genuinely felt disoriented in that universe. And to me, that was another good thing. Like, that's a sign. Like, why am I disoriented? Oh man, it's because, I'm too tied. And that was when I was, peak, executive. I mean,
Yeah, you had spent every day as a corporate executive,
Yeah.
and you weren't Chase Jarvis, photographer, artist.
yeah, at all. And it was very, very awakening. So in a roundabout way, very grateful for that
Yeah.
sort of destabilizing element for myself. And to me, that's what this is, right? At the end, I forget who developed the series Mad Men.
Oh, Matthew Weiner.
Yeah, and
Is it Weiner?
yeah, yeah. Actually, we had to look that up when I was doing the
The audiobook. I'm doing an audiobook in this chair later today. I was doing it yesterday, and you go, I'm not sure I know how to read, And all of a sudden, I find myself, I'm just doing it now. It's not lazy. I'm just more, I guess, savvy. I just go, I'm just going to use a different word here for the audiobook. The written one is who I would like to be as a person, and the audiobook is my actual reading comprehension and vocabulary.
Seth Godin, mutual
Yeah.
friend, lovely human. I sent him an advance copy. He's like the most generous person.
Yeah.
Sent me about this great feedback. And there's one of the original authors of the concept of flow is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
I don't know his name. I just know what it looks like.
And
I
it's
read
just
the
a
books. Yeah.
bunch of freaking
Mihaly is what I told myself it was. I have no idea. Yeah.
that guy.
His first name is in his last name, right? Like
Yes.
it's like
Mihai
Yeah.
Csikszentmihalyi.
yeah. So
But Seth and all his brilliance. He circles this and says, you have to read this. And I'm like, okay, noted.
yeah. I'll do like Latin sayings in my books, and then I'll be like, as the Latin saying says, and then I'll just say it in English. I'm like, I'm not fucking embarrassing myself. Although this is one of the nice things about AI.
Yeah.
Is it can be like, do this in my voice so I don't humiliate myself. Although we just did it on Right Thing Right Now, like some of the the ethnic pronunciations were too good. It was like I sounded like someone who was like, I just went to Barcelona, It was like
Perfect French or
yeah,
perfect
it was like
Catalan.
it was a cringe how good it was. It was like, can you make it sound worse like a regular person doesn't? Well, I'm going to show you some books. You want to go to the bookstore with us?
Yeah.